July 18th, E19, MSK, Kremlin. Moscow, President Vladimir Putin watched the live feed from the Taiwan Strait with a calculated detachment. The red phone call from President Ramirez had ended abruptly, and the world was now teetering on the edge of a superpower conflict. But Putin's mind was elsewhere, on the Baltics. The Suwałki Gap, that narrow 60-mile stretch of land between Poland and Lithuania, had long been a strategic vulnerability for NATO. With American carriers tied up in the Pacific and European attention fixated on Taiwan, the timing was perfect. Putin turned to his defense minister, Sergei Shoigu, and nodded. "Begin Operation Zima," he said. July 18, 10:30, seat, Suwałki Gap, Poland-Lithuania. Border, the first signs were subtle. Russian electronic warfare units jammed NATO communications across the region. Satellite signals flickered and GPS systems went dark. Then, without warning, a column of T-14 Armata tanks crossed the border from Belarus into the Suwałki Gap. They moved with precision, supported by BMP-3 infantry fighting vehicles and a swarm of Orlan-10 drones overhead. Polish border guards at Gauldap fired the first shots, but their anti-tank missiles were ineffective against the advanced Russian armour. Within hours, Russian forces had seized key choke points: the roads connecting Poland to Lithuania, the railway line, and the small towns of Suwałki and Augustów. The gap was theirs. NATO's response was immediate but fragmented. Estonian and Latvian forces mobilised, but their supply lines were now cut off. Lithuanian President Dalia Grybauskaitė declared a state of emergency, but Russian Spetsnaz units were already infiltrating Vilnius, sowing chaos. July 18th, 12. EST, NATO Headquarters. BrusselsGeneral Wesley Clark, NATO's Supreme Allied Commander Europe, stared at the situation map. Red arrows sliced through the Suwałki Gap, isolating the Baltics. The US was preoccupied with Taiwan, and European forces were scattered. Clark turned to his staff. "We need to reinforce the gap now," he said, "but we don't have the assets." French President Emmanuel Macron offered to deploy the Charles de Gaulle carrier group, but it was days away. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz hesitated, citing domestic opposition to escalation. Only the UK, under Prime Minister Keir Starmer, committed immediately, scrambling Typhoon jets from RAF Coningsby. They came charging in with only one objective: defend the gap at all costs. July 18, 14 Way, MSK, Kaliningrad. OblastRussian forces in Kaliningrad launched a secondary offensive, crossing into Lithuania from the west. Iskander missiles targeted Lithuanian air defences, clearing the way for Su-57 stealth fighters to establish air superiority. The Baltic Sea, once a NATO-dominated zone, was now a contested battlefield. Estonia's capital, Tallinn, braced for impact as Russian hypersonic Kinjal missiles struck key infrastructure. Latvia's Daugavpils fell to a rapid armoured assault, cutting off the eastern approach to Riga. July 18, 16. CET, Vilnius. Lithuania President Grybauskaitė addressed the nation from a bunker beneath the Seimas Palace. The city was dark, power lines severed by Russian sabotage. Outside, Russian flags fluttered over the occupied Suwałki Gap. "We will not surrender," she said. "The world must see this aggression for what it is." But the world was watching Taiwan. The US 7th Fleet was still engaged in the Pacific, and European capitals were divided. The Suwałki Gap had become a choke point not just for NATO logistics, but for the alliance's very credibility. July 19th, 02. MSK, St. Petersburg. Putin addressed the Russian people on state television. "The Baltics have always been part of our sphere," he declared. "NATO's expansion threatens our security. We act to protect our interests." The narrative was clear. Russia was reclaiming lost territory, exploiting the distraction of the Taiwan conflict. The Suwałki Gap was just the beginning. July 19th, 08 EST, the White House President Ramirez faced a new crisis. The Taiwan Strait was still burning, but now the Baltics were under threat. CKDEF laid out the options. Divert assets from Taiwan, risk losing the Pacific theatre, rely on European allies. But their response was tepid. Escalate globally. A world war loomed. Ramirez signed a directive deploying the 82nd Airborne Division to Poland, but it would take days to arrive. The Suwałki Gap was already lost. July 20th, South China Sea and Baltic Sea. The world held its breath as two fronts burned. In the Pacific, US carriers traded blows with the PLA Navy off Tainan. In the Baltics, Russian forces consolidated their gains, pushing towards Riga and Tallinn. NATO's Article 5 was invoked, but the alliance was fractured. The Suwałki Gap had become a symbol of vulnerability, a crack in the foundation of collective defense, and the world wondered how many more gaps would follow.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for part 3.